I am Joshua, 32, and my family banned me from my brother's wedding because my presence would ruin the aesthetic, right after I bought him a $3.5 million penthouse. Before I tell you about how I sold that penthouse right out from under him while the ceremony was happening, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It was 11 o'clock on a Friday night, the night before the wedding. My office in downtown San Francisco was completely quiet, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the server racks down the hall. Outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights were just soft blurs bleeding through the heavy coastal fog. I was sitting at my mahogany desk, rubbing my tired eyes, trying to finish up a predictive strategy report for a new artificial intelligence firm. I had a massive promotion on the line, and the salary bump that came with it was substantial, but my mind kept drifting. I was supposed to be at a rehearsal dinner. I was supposed to be standing next to my older brother, Caleb, raising a glass of expensive champagne to his new life. Instead, I was here, working, like always. My phone vibrated against the hard wood of the desk. The sudden buzzing sound made me jump. The screen lit up, cutting through the dim light of the office. It was a text message from my mother, Catherine. I reached for the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I figured she was texting to ask me to pick up some last-minute ice, or maybe a forgotten garment bag from the tailor. That was my role in the family, after all. The fixer. The guy with the deep pockets and the reliable car. I unlocked the screen. The words staring back at me were clinical, sharp, and designed to cut right down to the bone. Joshua, we have all discussed it. Your presence at the ceremony tomorrow would ruin the aesthetic of Caleb's high society event. We told Isabella's family we come from old money, and your self-made struggle reminds everyone of the truth we left behind. Please stay home. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't scream. My jaw tightened until my teeth ground together, and a thick, heavy knot formed at the base of my throat. I read the words again. Ruin the aesthetic. Self-made struggle. Please stay home. They were embarrassed by me. I was the guy who built a six-figure salary from absolute scratch. The guy who paid their bills when Robert, my father, invested in another failed scheme. Yet, to them, my calloused hands and my lack of a trust fund were a stain on their fabricated aristocratic image. I stared at the glowing blue text bubble until the letters started to blur together. I realized right then, in the cold silence of my office, a truth I had spent 32 years running away from. I wasn't a son. I wasn't a brother. I was an ATM. I was a silent investor funding the illusion of a happy, wealthy family. They didn't want me at the table. They just wanted me to pay for the meal. I placed the phone face down on the desk. My eyes drifted to the far corner of my workspace, landing on a thick, black leather-bound folder. The gold embossing on the cover caught the dim light. I reached over and pulled the folder toward me. I flipped it open. Inside sat the closing deed for a luxury penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay. $3.5 million of prime, unencumbered real estate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble countertops, and a private terrace that looked out over the Golden Gate Bridge. It was my wedding gift to Caleb. Looking back, I know how pathetic it sounds. I had spent millions of dollars trying to buy a seat at a table that was never set for me. It was my ultimate peace offering. I thought that by handing Caleb and my parents the literal keys to the high society life they so desperately craved, they would finally look at me with pride. I thought they would finally see me. I flipped to the last page of the dense legal document. There, at the bottom, was a line designated for the transfer of ownership. A line for Caleb's signature. I stared at it. The line was completely blank. A cold, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Caleb was always lazy. He was a man who believed the world owed him a living simply because he existed. I had sent these final transfer documents to him 3 weeks ago via certified mail. I told him he needed to sign them in front of a notary to finalize the transfer of the deed into his name. But Caleb, high on the thrill of his upcoming wedding and busy driving around in the leased Porsche I was secretly paying for, hadn't bothered to do it. He assumed my support was unconditional. He assumed I would never pull the rug out from under him. Legally, the penthouse was still 100% mine. Every brick, every pane of glass, every inch of that imported marble. It belonged to Joshua, the self-made struggle who ruined their aesthetic. The sadness I had felt just moments ago evaporated. It was replaced by a sharp, clinical clarity. My compassion had been a luxury, and my family had just overdrafted their account. I glanced at the digital clock on my computer monitor. 11:07 p.m. I picked up my phone and dialed David's personal cell number. David was my real estate agent, a shark in the Bay Area market who had helped me secure the penthouse. He wasn't used to hearing from me at this hour, but I paid him enough to pick up on the first ring. He answered on the third. Joshua. His voice was thick with sleep. Everything okay? The wedding is tomorrow, man. David, wake up. We need to move, I said, my voice completely steady. I need you to activate the emergency sale clause for the penthouse. I heard the rustling of sheets on the other end of the line. David was suddenly wide awake. Wait, what? The penthouse? The one you bought for Caleb? Yes, the buyer who put in the backup cash offer last week. The billionaire from tech. Tell him it's his. David hesitated. Joshua, that guy is aggressive. He already cleared the title search and signed a contingency-free agreement last Friday. If I call his team right now and trigger the final release of funds from escrow, this is a done deal. You can't undo this. And tomorrow is the wedding. Caleb is supposed to move in after the reception. I know exactly what tomorrow is, David. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the fog rolling over the city. I want the funds transferred into my primary account first thing in the morning. I'm closing the bank. Man, this is going to cause an absolute earthquake with your family, David warned. That's exactly the plan, I replied. Make the call. I hung up the phone. The die was cast. I sat in the silence of my office, the adrenaline slowly settling into a cold resolve. Suddenly, I wasn't a 32-year-old consultant at the top of my field. I was 12 years old again, standing in our cramped kitchen in Atlanta. I could almost smell it, that distinct mix of old cooking grease, stale humidity, and quiet disappointment. The screen door was whining on its rusted hinges, a sound that had essentially become the soundtrack to my entire childhood. My father, Robert, was sitting at the worn linoleum table, a cup of black coffee in his hand, checking the sports scores in the morning newspaper. Caleb was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on the table, already acting like the king of a castle he had never helped build. I remember the exact moment Robert reached into his leather wallet. He pulled out a crisp, new $50 bill and slid it across the table toward Caleb. Here you go, son, Robert had said. His voice was warm, proud. It was a tone he literally never used when he spoke to me. Take this. Go see a movie with your buddies tonight. You've been working hard at football practice. Caleb hadn't been working hard. Caleb was barely passing his middle school classes, and he spent most of his afternoons forcing me to do his household chores under the threat of a beating. But Robert didn't see that. Robert only saw the golden child, the athlete, the son who looked like him. I stepped forward then. My heart was thumping against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I had been holding a crumpled piece of paper in my pocket for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment to ask. Dad, I whispered. Robert didn't look up from his paper. What is it, Joshua? I need $38 for my new science and history textbooks. The school said I can't stay in the advanced placement track if I don't have them by Monday. The warmth evaporated from the kitchen instantly. Robert lowered the newspaper, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. He didn't even look at the list in my hand. Textbooks? He snapped. Joshua, you are always asking for something. Do you think I'm made of money? We have bills to pay. You need to learn to be more like your brother. He doesn't nag me for every little thing. I stood there, frozen. I looked at the $50 bill Caleb was already stuffing into the pocket of his jeans. Caleb caught my eye and gave me a slow, arrogant smirk. He knew exactly what was happening, and he loved it. That was the exact moment I realized I was entirely on my own. I walked out of the kitchen without the money for my books. I didn't cry, because in that house, tears were just another weapon they would use to call me weak. I got a job washing dishes at a diner the next week. My hands were constantly blistered from the industrial dishwasher water. While Caleb was out spending the cash my father handed him like candy, I was counting dirty quarters from the tip jar to save for my own college fund. I learned early that if I wanted to survive, I had to build my own ladder. I pulled myself out of the memory and grabbed my phone again. I opened Instagram. I didn't follow Caleb, but his profile was public. I needed to see exactly what I was dealing with. His latest post was a carousel of professionally edited photos. The first image was Caleb leaning against the hood of a sleek, silver Porsche 911. He was wearing designer sunglasses, grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Success is a mindset. Ready for the big day tomorrow." My jaw clenched. I leased that Porsche for him 6 months ago when he claimed he needed a luxury vehicle to project success for a new startup venture. A venture that failed in 3 weeks. He had been driving it on my dime ever since. I swiped to the next photo. It was Caleb and Isabella standing on the terrace of the Penthouse. My penthouse. They were holding crystal champagne flutes, the Golden Gate Bridge glowing in the background. Moving into our forever home after the wedding. Blessed to provide this life for my beautiful bride, he wrote. I scrolled down to the comments. Right at the top, pinned by Caleb, was a comment from our Aunt Eleanor. "So proud of you, Caleb. You carry the true elegance of our family line. Old money always finds its way back to the top. Joshua could learn a thing or two from your grace." Aunt Eleanor, the ultimate manipulator. She was the one who constantly fed my mother's delusions of grandeur. Our family wasn't old money. My grandfather owned a successful hardware store that went bankrupt in the 90s. But Eleanor and my mother spun this fabricated web of aristocratic heritage to mask their current financial failures. And Caleb was their golden prince. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, clinical amusement wash over me. It was like watching a computer simulation based entirely on corrupted data. He had spent his whole life letting me pay for his mistakes. Yet here he was, branding my capital as his own character. They wanted to protect their aesthetic. Fine. I was going to tear the entire canvas to shreds. The next morning, the sun broke through the San Francisco fog, casting a sharp, unforgiving light across my desk. I hadn't slept a wink. It was 8 a.m. Caleb's wedding ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. The clock was ticking loudly in my head. My phone rang. It wasn't David. It was an unfamiliar number. "Joshua? This is Carter from Bay Area Escrow Services." A stiff, bureaucratic voice said on the other end. "I received an urgent wire transfer request from your agent, David, regarding the Penthouse property. However, due to the high dollar amount and the unusual timing of an emergency contingency execution, our internal fraud department has placed a temporary hold on the funds." I sat up straight, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. "Carter, I signed the contingency-free agreement. The buyer is paying in cash. The title is clear. There is zero legal basis for a hold." "I understand, sir," Carter replied, his tone dripping with condescending corporate politeness. "But standard procedure requires a 48-hour review period for weekend transfers of this magnitude. We just want to ensure everything is above board." He was stalling. He was a middle manager flexing the tiny bit of power he had over a multi-million-dollar transaction. "Listen to me very carefully, Carter," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all traces of politeness. "I am the director of strategy at Vertex AI. My corporate accounts, my personal accounts, and my investment portfolios are all managed by your bank's wealth division. My salary alone clears your branch's monthly quota. If that $3.5 million is not fully cleared and sitting in my primary checking account in the next 20 minutes, I will call my wealth manager and pull every single asset I hold out of your institution by Monday morning." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could almost hear Carter doing the math in his head, realizing he was about to lose a massive client over a procedural technicality. Please hold, sir, Carter stammered. I waited. 2 minutes later, he came back on the line. His voice was noticeably higher. The hold has been manually overridden, Joshua. The wire transfer is initiating now. The funds should reflect in your account momentarily. Thank you, Carter. Have a good weekend. I hung up. A minute later, my bank app chimed. I refreshed the screen. There it was. A deposit of $3,500,000. The numbers looked heavy. Final. The absolute end of my life as a Henderson asset. Just as I closed the banking app, a notification popped up at the top of my screen. One missed call from Wyatt. Wyatt was my cousin. We grew up together. For years, I thought he was the only normal one in the family. He used to complain with me about Caleb's arrogance at family barbecues. I had even helped Wyatt secure a loan for his small business a few years back. I tapped his name and called him back. He answered on the first ring. In the background, I could hear the muffled sounds of a string quartet warming up. He was already at the wedding venue. "Hey, Josh!" Wyatt practically yelled over the music. He sounded slightly drunk, even though it was only mid-morning. "Man, where are you? Aunt Catherine said you caught a stomach bug and couldn't make it to the pre-wedding brunch." A stomach bug. That was the lie they went with to explain my absence. "I'm at work, Wyatt," I said calmly. "Mom told me not to come." Wyatt laughed. A loud, braying sound that grated against my eardrums. "Yeah, I know, buddy. I was standing right there when she sent the text. Honestly, it's for the best. Caleb is stressed enough trying to impress Isabella's family. We didn't need you showing up in an off-the-rack suit bringing the vibe down." I froze. "You were there." "Yeah, man. We were all laughing about it," Wyatt admitted, completely oblivious to the gravity of what he was saying. "Listen, I actually called to ask a favor. Caleb forgot the temporary master code for the Penthouse keypad. I know you set it up. He wants to take Isabella's parents there right after the ceremony for photos. What's the code again?" My blood ran completely cold. Wyatt wasn't just a bystander. He was actively participating in my humiliation. This was the guy whose business I kept afloat. "You want the code?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah, just text it to me." "Wyatt, how much is Caleb paying you to be his errand boy?" He scoffed. "Hey, back off. Caleb slips me a few $100 here and there to help him out. He's got the penthouse, he's got the Porsche. The guy is rolling in it. Don't be bitter just because you're stuck in an office." He was spying on me. Wyatt had been reporting my financial moves to Caleb for pocket change. "I'll text you the code, Wyatt," I said. "Awesome. See you around, Josh." He hung up. I set the phone down. I wasn't just cutting off my parents and my brother. The rot had spread to the entire tree. I was burning the whole forest down. At noon, I left my office and drove straight to the financial district. I walked into the sleek, glass-walled office of my lawyer and best friend, Matthew. Matthew was a shark in a tailored suit, a family law attorney who handled everything from brutal corporate litigation to high-net-worth divorce cases. He was ruthless, calculating, and absolutely loyal to me. I sat down in the leather chair across from his massive desk. The room smelled of expensive espresso and old paper. Matthew didn't bother with pleasantries. He pushed a thick, gray file folder across the desk toward me. "I did the digging you asked for," Matthew said, leaning back and steepling his fingers. "When you told me your mother banned you from the wedding, I figured Caleb might try to pull a fast one and contest the penthouse sale by claiming you made a verbal promise. I went looking for leverage, financial irregularities, bad debts, something to scare him off." I looked at the gray folder. The name Joshua Henderson was scrawled across the line, but the pressure of the pen was wrong. The slant was too aggressive. It was a near-perfect imitation of my handwriting, but it was forged by someone who had never learned to wait for what he wanted. "Caleb," I whispered. "He forged your identity," Matthew confirmed, his tone deadpan. "He found the original deed in your parents' safe. He used a dormant checking account you haven't monitored since college to funnel the money out." The transfer hit the account on a Tuesday. By Thursday night, the entire $180,000 had been withdrawn in a cashier's check. I looked up. Where did it go? Matthew slid a bank statement across the desk. A high-stakes casino in Las Vegas. He lost your entire inheritance at the blackjack tables in 48 hours. I leaned back in the chair. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. I didn't feel a breakdown coming on. I didn't feel tears. I felt a binary clarity. Cold, absolute release of all guilt. Caleb wasn't just a spoiled brat. He was a predator in a rented tuxedo. He was a felon. And my parents, who constantly bragged about his financial acumen, had to have known. They covered for his crimes while calling my successes lucky breaks. File the criminal complaint, I told Matthew. Identity theft, grand larceny, wire fraud, everything. I want the police report numbers included in the final eviction notice we are serving to the Penthouse tonight. Matthew smiled, a dangerous, sharp expression. Consider it done. I walked out of Matthew's office and stood on the busy sidewalk of Market Street. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Nathan, the eccentric tech billionaire who had just bought the Penthouse with a massive cash wire. Joshua, Nathan barked. He was a man who didn't believe in small talk. The wire cleared. The title is mine. I'm moving my art collection in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I want the place completely empty. No lingering guests, no bullshit. It's empty, Nathan. It's all yours. Good doing business with you. He hung up. I looked at my watch. It was 3:30 p.m. Over at the country club, guests were taking their seats. The string quartet was likely playing the processional. My mother was probably dabbing fake tears from her eyes, adjusting her hat, ensuring the aesthetic was perfect. Caleb was standing at the altar, waiting for Isabella, secure in the knowledge that he was about to step into a multi-million-dollar life that I had bankrolled. I made one last phone call. To the premier locksmith service in the city. I need an emergency dispatch to the Vertex Tower penthouse. I told the dispatcher. I am the legal owner. I need the master electronic keypad completely wiped and reprogrammed. I need the mechanical deadbolt swapped. And I need it done in the next 2 hours. That's going to cost triple our emergency rate. Sir? The dispatcher warned. Put it on my card, I said. I stood on the street corner and took a deep breath of the salty bay air. The trap was set. The gun was loaded. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk right into the crosshairs. The sky above San Francisco was the color of old bruises. Deep purple and fading black. By the time I parked my car across the street from the Vertex Tower, it was 10:30 p.m. The wedding reception was winding down. I stood in the deep shadows of the private, open-air corridor that led to the front door of the penthouse. The hallway was dead silent, smelling faintly of the expensive lavender diffuser I had bought for the entryway months ago. The elevator bell dinged softly at the end of the hall. I pressed my back against the dark alcove. The polished mahogany doors of the elevator slid open. Caleb stepped out first, looking like he owned the world. He was wearing a custom-tailored white tuxedo jacket, his hair perfectly styled. Isabella was beside him, stunning in her white lace wedding gown, holding a bouquet of wilting white roses. Wait until you see the terrace, babe, Caleb was saying, his voice echoing off the marble floors. The view of the bridge is unbelievable. I knew the second I saw this place that I had to buy it for us. I had to buy it. The lie rolled off his tongue so naturally it made me sick. They reached the massive oak front door. Caleb confidently reached for the electronic keypad. He punched in the code Wyatt had given him. Beep. A flat, harsh red error light flashed on the panel. Caleb frowned. Hold on. Must have hit the wrong button. He tried again, typing slower this time. Beep. The red light flashed again. Isabella shifted her weight, holding up the heavy train of her dress. Is it the right code, Caleb? I'm exhausted. It's the right code, Caleb muttered, his voice tightening with annoyance. He grabbed the heavy brass handle and jiggled it violently. The door didn't budge a millimeter. He gave it a solid shoulder shove, as if physical force could somehow override a legal reality. That was when I stepped out of the shadows. Slowly, deliberately. My leather shoes made a soft thud against the marble as I walked into the spill of the overhead hallway lights. Caleb spun around, his jaw slackening in pure shock. "Joshua!" Isabella looked at me, confusion knitting her brow. "Joshua? I thought. Your mom said you had a terrible stomach bug." Caleb's face instantly turned an ugly, mottled shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged against his bow tie. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, stepping aggressively toward me. "And why won't my door open?" I stopped 10 feet away from him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It won't open, Caleb," I said clearly, "because I already sold it." Caleb stared at me like I was speaking a dead language. The silence in the hallway was so heavy you could choke on it. "Sold it?" Caleb scoffed, an arrogant, nervous laugh escaping his lips. "You can't sell our house. Are you insane? This is our wedding gift. The deed is in my name." "Is it?" I tilted my head. "Did you ever actually sign the transfer documents I mailed you 3 weeks ago? Or were you too busy driving that leased Porsche I pay for to stop by a notary?" Caleb's face went completely pale. The blood drained from his cheeks as the reality of his own laziness crashed into him. Beside him, Isabella looked back and forth between us. "Caleb, what is he talking about? You said you bought this place with the profits from your startup." I stayed silent, letting the tension fall squarely into her lap. Caleb panicked. He lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "You vindictive little prick. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. You're ruining my wedding night because you're a miserable, lonely loser. You owe me this house. We are family." He was screaming about loyalty, but as I watched him, I realized he was just suffering from the illusion of power that comes from a completely empty wallet. He had built his entire identity on assets he never earned. "You want to talk about family, Caleb?" I asked, my voice cutting through his screaming like a razor blade. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the thick gray envelope Matthew had given me. I tossed it through the air. It landed with a heavy smack right at Caleb's feet. Caleb looked at the envelope like it was a live hand grenade. He didn't move to pick it up. "Let's talk about the $180,000 you stole from me," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly to Isabella. "Let's talk about how you forged my signature to sell our grandmother's land in Georgia, and then blew every single cent of my inheritance at a Las Vegas casino." The silence that followed was lethal. Isabella gasped. She dropped her bouquet. The white roses scattered across the marble floor. Before Caleb could stop her, she reached down and snatched the envelope. "Isabella, don't look at that. He's lying," Caleb shouted, reaching for her wrist. She yanked her arm away. Her eyes frantically scanned the digital forensics report, the forged deed, and the bank trace that Matthew had highlighted. She saw the casino withdrawals. She saw the dates. She looked up at the man she had just married 3 hours ago, and she saw a complete stranger. "You're a thief," she whispered. Her voice cracked, sounding like glass shattering under pressure. "You told me your little brother was the toxic one. You said he was the drama. But you're a criminal. You built our entire life on a lie you stole from him." Caleb fell to his knees, his hands grabbing at her dress. "Baby, please. I was protecting you. I wanted to give you the life you deserve. I was going to pay him back once my business took off." "The business you haven't worked at in 6 months," I added calmly. Isabella didn't wait for another lie. She didn't scream. She just reached up to her left hand and twisted the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. The ring he had likely bought using the money he stole from my land. She dropped it. It made a small, sharp metallic ping as it bounced off the marble and rolled to a stop right at my shoes. She didn't look at Caleb again. She turned around, gathered the skirt of her white dress, and walked back toward the elevator. The doors opened. She stepped inside and disappeared. Caleb didn't chase her. He slumped against the locked oak door of the penthouse, his head buried in his hands. His carefully constructed, aesthetic-perfect world finally matched his bank account. 0. I stood over him. I held all the power he had taken for granted his entire life, and I didn't feel a single flicker of pity. "Goodbye, Caleb," I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the stairwell. I hope the aesthetic was worth it. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment below to let me know you've been with me. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout from the hallway confrontation was swift, clinical, and absolutely devastating. By 7 a.m. the next morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. I sat on the balcony of my own modest apartment, sipping a black coffee, watching the numbers flash across the screen. 16 missed calls, all from my father, Robert, and my mother, Catherine. I finally answered the 17th call. "Joshua!" My mother screamed through the speaker. She sounded frantic, completely unhinged. The polished, aristocratic tone she usually faked was entirely gone. "What have you done? Caleb is in a jail cell. The police showed up at the hotel this morning and arrested him in his tuxedo. And Isabella's family is threatening to sue us for the cost of the wedding. He committed a felony, Mom," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Identity theft and grand larceny. The police are just doing their jobs." "He's your brother." Robert's voice boomed in the background, taking over the phone. "You drop these charges right now, Joshua. Do you hear me? You are ruining our family's reputation. How are we supposed to show our faces at the club?" "You don't have a reputation, Dad," I replied. "You have a delusion, and you funded it with my blood, sweat, and stolen inheritance." The tone on the other end of the line suddenly shifted. The anger dissolved into desperate, pathetic pleading. "Josh, please," Robert begged, his voice cracking. "We're broke. We took out a second mortgage on our house to pay for our half of the wedding because Caleb promised he was going to let us live in the penthouse guest suite. If he goes to prison, we lose everything. We need a loan. Just give us a loan to hire a defense lawyer." I looked out at the city skyline. I thought about the 12-year-old boy begging for $38 for a textbook, while the golden child got $50 for a movie. "You used up your credit line with me 20 years ago, Dad," I said. "Do not contact me again." I pressed end call and blocked their numbers. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The liquidation of Caleb's fake empire happened faster than I could have ever predicted. Because Matthew had filed the police reports, the details of Caleb's fraud became public record. The high society circles in San Francisco that my mother had spent decades trying to penetrate immediately slammed their doors shut. They became pariahs overnight. On Monday morning, I got a notification on my phone from the luxury car rental agency. Because I had canceled the autopay on Caleb's account, they had tracked the GPS on the Porsche. A tow truck arrived at the police precinct parking lot and repossessed the silver 911 right in front of the local news cameras that were waiting for Caleb's bail hearing. As for Isabella, she didn't waste a single second. She contacted her own lawyers and initiated a divorce filing before the weekend was even over. She realized quickly that she hadn't married a successful entrepreneur. She had married a man who built a throne out of stolen memories and forged checks. I didn't attend the court hearings. I didn't read the dramatic text messages Wyatt tried to send me about how the family was falling apart. I didn't care. I had successfully excised the tumor that had been draining my life source for 3 decades. The $3.5 million was sitting safely in my account. The penthouse belonged to Nathan, the tech billionaire. And I was finally, truly free to live a life where my worth wasn't tied to my wallet. A full month had passed since that chaotic, beautiful night in the dimly lit hallway of the Vertex Tower. 30 whole days since I walked away from the locked oak door of the penthouse, leaving Caleb to face the crushing reality of his own deceit. and leaving my parents to face the absolute collapse of their fabricated aristocratic empire. You are conditioned from a very young age to believe that completely severing ties with your parents and your only sibling will leave a massive, unfillable void in your chest. Society constantly beats the drum that blood is thicker than water, that family is everything, and that without them, you are entirely unmoored in this world. But as I sat in my office on a crisp Tuesday morning, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the San Francisco skyline, I realized something profoundly different. I did not feel empty. I did not feel unmoored. I felt incredibly, undeniably light. It was as if I had been carrying a 100-pound weight of guilt and obligation on my shoulders for 32 years, and someone had finally taken a sharp knife and cut the heavy leather straps. I could finally breathe. The $3.5 million from the emergency sale of the Penthouse had cleared the bank without a single hitch. It was sitting in my primary checking account. I remember logging into my banking portal that first morning, staring at the long string of zeros glowing on the screen. That massive number represented the absolute end of my financial subjugation. But looking at that balance did not bring me the superficial joy you might expect. It brought me a deep, grounding sense of responsibility. That money was originally meant to buy a seat at a table that was never set for me. It was meant to buy the love of people who only loved my wallet. Now, I needed to use it to build an entirely new table. I called Matthew, my fiercely loyal friend and brilliant lawyer, into my office later that afternoon. The sky outside was a heavy, slate gray, and rain was beginning to streak the glass. Matthew walked in, his expensive Italian leather shoes completely dry despite the weather, dropped his heavy briefcase on the floor, and immediately poured himself a cup of black coffee from the carafe on my credenza. Matthew was a man who handled brutal, high-net-worth divorce cases and incredibly vicious custody battles for the city's elite. He was not a man who sugarcoated the truth. He sat down in the chair across from my desk and looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. "The criminal case against your brother is moving forward at a terrifying speed," Matthew said, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "The district attorney is not offering any sort of lenient plea deal. Given the overwhelming, documented evidence of identity theft, the forged signatures on the property deed, and the federal wire fraud charges that kicked in when he moved the money from your grandmother's land across state lines to the Vegas casinos, they have him dead to rights. He is looking at serious, mandatory state prison time." I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the information. A very small, buried part of me, the 12-year-old boy sitting in that greasy kitchen back in Atlanta, felt a tiny, fleeting ping of sorrow. But the adult Joshua, the man who had worked his hands to the bone scrubbing dishes just to survive, felt nothing but a cold, absolute sense of justice. "And your parents," Matthew continued, his voice dropping slightly, "are completely bankrupt because they refinanced their home and took out a massive second mortgage to pay for their half of that extravagant wedding. Expecting to live rent-free in the Penthouse guest suite, they are defaulting on everything. They cannot afford a private defense attorney for Caleb. The golden child is currently relying on an overworked, underpaid public defender to save him from a multi-year sentence." I looked out at the rain hitting the window. It was the ultimate devastating irony. The people who had obsessed so deeply over their aesthetic, over projecting wealth and superiority, had lost everything because they built their entire foundation on my stolen inheritance and my exploited generosity. "I didn't ask you here today to talk about Caleb or my parents," I finally said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the cool mahogany of my desk. "Their legal battles are their own. I want to talk about the Penthouse money. I do not want $3.5 million just sitting dormant in my account, earning interest. I want to build something with it, something real, something permanent." Matthew raised a single, sharp eyebrow. "Are we talking about aggressive real estate investments? Corporate acquisitions? Tech startups?" "No," I replied firmly. "We are talking about a foundation. I want to call it the Legacy Foundation." I spent the next 3 hours outlining my exact vision to Matthew. I wanted to create a comprehensive, fully funded scholarship and mentorship program explicitly designed for young adults who were the spare parts of their own families. I wanted to find the kids who were currently working double shifts in hot, grease-stained diners just to scrape together a basic college fund. I wanted to find the teenagers whose parents viewed them purely as financial resources to be drained, rather than bright minds to be nurtured. I wanted to give them the financial map, the emotional support, and the professional network that I never had. Matthew's usual cynical, battle-hardened demeanor softened right before my eyes. He set his coffee cup down and looked at me with a profound, genuine respect. "Joshua, that is the most brilliant way to rewrite your history I have ever heard. It took us exactly 3 weeks to cut through the bureaucratic red tape, establish the legal trust, and officially launch the foundation. We hosted a small, highly private launch event for the Legacy Foundation at a quiet, elegant art gallery downtown. There were no flashing cameras. There were no social media influencers. There was no desperate, manufactured attempt to project a high society aesthetic. The room was simply filled with my corporate colleagues, my trusted mentors, and the few loyal friends who had stood by me when the ugly truth about my family finally came out. Mr. Lincoln, the CEO and founding partner of Vertex AI, was our keynote speaker for the evening. Mr. Lincoln was a towering figure in the tech industry, a man who commanded absolute respect not through fear or intimidation, but through his unwavering, ironclad integrity. He knew my entire story. He knew about the diner, the struggle for the textbooks, the stolen land, and the relentless, burning drive that brought me to the doors of his firm. He stepped up to the wooden podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the small crowd. Then his eyes locked directly onto mine. "A lot of people in the corporate world love to talk about potential," Mr. Lincoln said, his voice deep, resonant, and filling the entire gallery. "They measure a person's worth by their pedigrees, by the elite universities they attended, or the historical weight of the last name they carry. But let me tell you a secret about true character. True character is not inherited. It is forged in the absolute fires of intense adversity." Joshua Henderson walked into my firm years ago with nothing but a brilliant mind, a cheap suit, and a work ethic that frankly terrified some of our senior staff. A warm, knowing chuckle rippled through the room. "His family may not have recognized his immense value," Mr. Lincoln continued, his tone turning fiercely serious, the humor completely vanishing from his face. "They may have looked at his incredible success and seen nothing but an open checkbook. But here at Vertex, we see the man. We see the brilliant strategist. And it is my absolute honor to announce tonight that Joshua is not just launching this incredible, life-changing foundation. Effective immediately, he is stepping into the role of senior partner at our firm. That comes with a massive promotion, an executive corner office, a substantial salary increase, and a permanent voice at the leadership table that he has more than earned." The applause that filled the room wasn't the polite, measured clapping you usually hear at corporate events. It was warm, it was genuine, and it was thunderous. I stood up, my chest tight with emotion, and shook Mr. Lincoln's hand. In that specific moment, surrounded by people who valued my intellect, my loyalty, and my character over my bank account, I realized I had finally found my real family. I didn't have to buy my way into this room with a multi-million-dollar gift. I had built my place here with my own 2 hands. The very next morning, the sky over the city was a brilliant, crisp, cloudless blue. I walked into a small, independent coffee shop located right near the Embarcadero waterfront. The comforting smell of roasted espresso beans and fresh sea salt filled the air. Sitting at a quiet corner table, wrapped in a thick, oversized wool sweater, was Isabella. It had been over a month since I last saw her running away from the penthouse corridor, her white lace wedding dress trailing behind her. She looked completely different today. The heavy, anxious, desperate energy she had carried during her brief time with Caleb was entirely gone. She looked physically exhausted, yes, but she also looked fundamentally lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted from her shoulders. I walked over and sat down across from her. She offered a small, hesitant smile and pushed a steaming ceramic mug of black coffee across the table toward me. "I ordered exactly what you usually get," she said softly. Thank you, Isabella. It is really good to see you looking so well. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the cafe, the clinking of spoons against porcelain, and the low chatter of the morning commuters. There was absolutely no awkwardness between us. We were bonded by a very strange, very painful shared trauma. We had both been manipulated, used, and lied to by the exact same master illusionist. The divorce was legally finalized on paper yesterday morning, she finally said, looking down at her bare left hand where that stolen diamond ring used to sit. Because we were married for less than 24 hours, and the marriage was obviously never consummated after the reception, my lawyer was able to push for a rapid, emergency annulment based on extreme criminal fraud. Caleb didn't even try to fight the proceedings. He was too busy dealing with the grand larceny charges and trying to figure out how to survive in a holding cell. I am incredibly glad you got out fast and clean, I told her, my voice full of genuine relief. You didn't deserve a single second of that nightmare. You were collateral damage in a one-sided war he was waging against me. She looked up, her eyes suddenly very bright and very fierce. I wasn't just collateral damage, Joshua. I was an active accessory to his fantasy, even if I didn't know it. He used me as a prop. He used me to prove to you and to your parents that he was a successful, functional, highly capable adult. I feel so incredibly stupid for not seeing all the glaring red flags. The leased luxury cars, the extravagant stories that never quite added up, the way he always had a perfectly crafted excuse for why his supposedly brilliant business wasn't generating a single dollar of actual revenue. You aren't stupid, Isabella, I corrected her gently but firmly. Narcissists are professional, high-level shapeshifters. They show you exactly what you want to see. They mirror your desires until the trap completely snaps shut. He fooled my parents for 30 entire years. You figured it out and walked away in just a few months. That takes incredible strength. She took a deep, shaking breath, her shoulders physically dropping as she released the tension. Well, I am starting over, completely from scratch. I moved out of the city limits and rented a tiny, quiet apartment over in the East Bay. I actually just enrolled in a master's degree program for clinical psychology. I want to deeply understand how people like Caleb operate, and I want to spend my career helping the people they destroy put their lives back together. I smiled, genuinely, deeply impressed by her resilience. That is an incredible pivot, Isabella, truly. But graduate school in the Bay Area is notoriously, overwhelmingly expensive. Are you going to be okay financially while you study? A wide, genuine, beautiful smile broke across her face for the first time since I had known her. Actually, I received a very unexpected, very generous gift. Right after the wedding disaster hit the news, your CEO, Mr. Lincoln, reached out directly to my lawyer. He said he had heard exactly what happened. He said he absolutely despises men who build their fragile egos by tearing down good, honest women. He wired a $50,000 cash gift directly into my personal checking account. He called it a fresh start fund. I tried to refuse it, I really did, but his legal team literally wouldn't let me send it back. I leaned back in my wooden chair, completely stunned for a second, and then I laughed out loud. It was a rich, booming laugh. That was classic, quintessential Lincoln. He used his immense personal wealth as a precision scalpel, cutting away the toxic rot of the world and surgically supporting the good people who deserved a chance. Keep it, I told her, still smiling. You earned every single penny of that money simply by surviving the Henderson family. We clinked our heavy coffee mugs together right there in the middle of the crowded cafe. We didn't toast to family blood. We didn't toast to aesthetic or old money or any of the lies we had been fed. We toasted to chosen kinship. We toasted to the people who actually see you when the bright lights are turned off, when the money is completely gone, and when there are no cameras around to perform for. It is very late now. The city outside my window is completely quiet, wrapped tightly in the familiar, comforting embrace of the midnight coastal fog. I am sitting in my new, expansive corner office as a senior partner, looking at a beautifully framed photograph sitting on my desk. It isn't a picture of my parents. It isn't a picture of my brother. It is a picture taken at the Legacy Foundation's very first scholarship banquet. A picture of me standing proudly next to 3 brilliant, remarkably resilient college students who are absolutely going to change the world, all because they finally got the financial backing and the emotional support their own toxic families aggressively refused to give them. When you grow up as the designated scapegoat in a deeply dysfunctional, narcissistic family system, you develop a massive hyperfixation on total self-sufficiency. You do not just work to pay your bills and live comfortably. You work to prove to the universe that you have a fundamental, undeniable right to take up space on this earth. People look at my career success, my corporate titles, my investment portfolios, and my bank accounts, and they call it raw ambition. They call it the American dream. But I know the dark truth. For a very, very long time, that success was born from a much darker, much more painful place. It was a prison without bars. It was a psychological state of constant panic where I genuinely believed that if I could just build a ladder high enough, if I could just accumulate enough wealth, I could finally reach a place where I was visible to the exact people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But I have come to realize, through all the pain and the legal battles and the heartbreak, that the absolute most dangerous prison in the world is the one where we sit quietly, waiting for permission to leave from the exact same people who locked us inside. I spent decades of my life trying to buy a soul that was never up for sale. I honestly thought that by handing Caleb the keys to a multi-million-dollar penthouse, I could magically rewrite our entire history. I thought I could force my father to look at me with the pride he reserved only for the golden child. I thought I could stop my mother from treating my very existence like a shameful secret that ruined her country club aesthetic. I was a recognized expert at predicting complex AI systems and market algorithms in my professional life, but I completely failed to account for the most basic, fundamental human variable. You absolutely cannot heal a toxic dynamic by feeding it more of your energy, your money, or your time. You can only heal yourself by walking away. Forgiveness is an incredibly complicated, often weaponized concept. Society constantly tells us that we must forgive our families in order to find our own peace. They tell us that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But nobody ever tells you about the other, much more important side of forgiveness. Sometimes the most profound, the most healing, the most radical thing you can possibly do is not to forgive them for breaking you, but to forgive yourself for ever believing their corrupted, toxic version of who you are. I had to hold a metaphorical funeral for the family I always desperately wanted, so I could finally turn around and embrace the incredible, beautiful life I actually had right in front of me. If you are watching this video right now, and you find yourself in a similar situation, I need you to pause whatever you are doing and listen to me very, very carefully. If you are the one sitting at the edge of the living room during the holidays, feeling like the spare part in your own family machine, if you are the one who is only ever called when there is a massive bill to be paid, a crisis to be managed, a mess to be cleaned up, or a favor to be granted, reclaiming your worth is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of absolute necessary survival. Setting a hard, immovable boundary with your family is not about building a massive brick wall to keep the world out. It is about clearly, definitively establishing where your beautiful, hard-earned life begins and exactly where their chaotic dysfunction ends. You are not a phase. You are not a burden. And you absolutely do not owe your life, your sanity, or your bank account to people who only view you as a financial resource to be overdraft whenever it suits them. I used to spend my nights dreaming about getting revenge on Caleb and my parents. I used to imagine screaming at them, laying out all my bank statements, proving my worth, and making them feel the intense, burning pain they inflicted on me every single day of my childhood. But as I stand here today, completely free, looking out over the city I helped build, I realize that the best revenge isn't the destruction of those who hurt you. The best revenge is building a life so bright, so full of incredible purpose, and so rich with genuine love, that their early dismissal of you becomes completely, utterly, and permanently irrelevant. I told the truth. I closed the door. I locked the penthouse. And for the first time in my entire life, I am finally home. We go through life carrying the incredibly heavy baggage handed to us by the very people who were supposed to protect us. If there is one crucial, life-changing educational lesson I took from this entire grueling ordeal, It is that loyalty must never be a one-way street, especially within the confines of a family. From the time we are children, we are taught to respect our elders, to support our siblings unconditionally, and to keep family secrets hidden behind closed doors. But unconditional love should never, under any circumstances, mean unconditional tolerance for abuse, financial theft, and emotional manipulation. When we constantly step in to rescue toxic family members from the natural consequences of their own terrible actions, we aren't helping them grow. We are simply funding their dysfunction. I learned the hard way that you cannot buy genuine respect, and you cannot negotiate with people who view your kindness as a weakness to be exploited. The very moment you step into your own power, draw a line in the sand, and say no, the people who were heavily benefiting from your silent suffering will inevitably call you selfish. Let them. Your mental health, your peace of mind, and your hard-earned stability are worth infinitely more than their conditional, manufactured approval. Protect your peace at all costs, because no one else will do it for you. I want to hear from you. What is the most powerful lesson you took away from my story today? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to save yourself? Please share your thoughts and your stories with me in the comments below. Or, if this story simply resonated with you, if it gave you a sense of validation and made you feel a little less alone in your struggles, just drop the word "good" in the comments so I know you are standing strong in your own truth. Thank you for being part of my chosen family today.